All right, welcome everybody. Good to have everybody with us. That's Natalie there. I'm Gary. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. So good to see people from Europe able to join us for a show rather than it being in the middle of the night. So that's good to see. And obviously, lots of people from Canada. So people checking out Natalie and seeing what's going on from Canada. That's fantastic.
Everyone's saying where they're from?
Oh yes, yeah. In the comments, yes, we get to learn where people are from all over the place. France. Jessica Grimm is here from Bavaria.
Welcome.
Yep, several people from Canada. So that's fantastic. Thanks, folks, for joining us here. I hope everybody brought questions because we're ready for questions. Natalie's got a table full of things things to show that she hopes is going to hit all the questions. So that's fantastic. We're looking forward to it. One of the things that we wanted to get on the table right away, a question that I've had more than once just in the past week, is where do you buy Goldwork materials? Where do you buy these threads and the holding threads and all of these pieces and bits and things that go into doing this kind of work? And so let's get that on the table right away so that people know. And I know for a lot of people, this stuff is not cheap, and I want to make sure I'm getting good quality stuff. I don't want to spend good money and then have something that's substandard. So Natalie, let's just start with that. Where do we buy this stuff?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, there's lots of smaller shops that you can buy it from. In Canada, you can buy from Berlin Embroidery, based out of Calgary, and in Quebec, there's l'Atelier de Penelope. In the U.S., there's lots of smaller shops that have bits and pieces of Goldwork materials. But my favorite place by far in the U.S. is Tinsel Trading Company, which is based out of Berkeley, California. And they specialize in vintage metal threads. So you can get spools of metal wire and ribbons from 100 years ago, still in the original state. Last week, I don't know if you remember, I showed these big hanks here. These spools here, you can see how shiny they are with the rainbow. This is the kind of very special metal threads that you can buy from them. So you won't get anything new. You get all the vintage stuff with this gorgeous patina on it. So that's my favorite place to go in the U.S. I'll demonstrate with a couple of those a little bit later on. In the UK, there are shops like Golden Hind. Let's see. Of course, there's the place I buy wholesale from, which is Benton and Johnson. But there you need to buy in fairly large quantity. That being said, if you're going to really get into doing Goldwork embroidery, it's quite profitable for you to buy it in bulk, by the gram, 25 grams. Let's see, there's also Sarah Humphrey embroidery in the UK. And then in Australia, of course, there's Alison Cole. So it depends where you live and what you want to pay for shipping.
Now, would you say that in general, obviously from these people, you're going to get the top quality stuff then? Top quality material. Is there substandard material that we need to avoid, or is what exists in the world all pretty much
no,
top
those
quality?
Places that I said are selling. Like I wouldn't buy beyond those places.
Okay.
Like you can get some from the Middle East, but I can't. I can't say that you're going to get the best quality materials. You can buy. Let's see. I know a lot of places are buying from India, but I haven't tested them myself to say if they're the same as the quality that I'm buying from the UK.
Okay.
So probably most of the suppliers that I'm talking about are buying their materials from one of the two factories that remain in the UK.
That's the source then. Yeah, Jessica Grimm also mentioning that she carries the Goldwork supplies also from Benton and Johnson. So
right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yep. Okay, so yeah, because I know people, that's a concern. You don't want to spend what is in effect a lot of money on threads and then find that it's just coming apart on you as you're stitching. And yeah, I'm with that 100%. Talk to me about you when we did the show Sunday. You talked about, as beginners, using Congress cloth as a way to provide a built-in guide as you're laying threads and couching. Talk about that in terms of, do we just use the Congress cloth? Do we use a backing cloth underneath that?
Right.
How do we go about that technically?
So with Goldwork embroidery, it's always a good idea to have a ground cloth, like just an inexpensive calico or muslin. And there are some that are heavier weight than others. So if the material that you're going to embroider upon is already quite heavy, you don't need to have the really thick muslin or calico. Or you can go for a lighter weight one. But the reason you want to always have some kind of backing fabric is twofold. One is to provide support to your silk if you're using a silk, but also as a place for you when you turn over your frame and you have to anchor off all of the threads that you would have plunged before. You need a place to anchor them, and it's easier if you have calico or muslin instead of trying to make sure you don't pick up your silk fabric on the front. So place to finish your threads as well.
So if I use Congress cloth, then I need to put a calico or muslin underneath it and stitch through both, and then that after I do a few, then they're connected and we just move on.
Yes.
Yeah.
That being said, I have seen lots of people do Goldwork just on one layer of fabric, and it just makes it more difficult for them to find a place to anchor their threads. And sometimes the weight of their gold threads is just a bit too much for the fabric, and the fabric would sag.
Yeah, yeah. And talk about that. That was a question I had that I really meant to ask you last Sunday. Talk about the various cloths that you use as a base, and you talk about heavy muslin or heavy calico. What give us a sense of what types of materials that you use as a general practice.
So, are you talking about my ground cloth that's going to be hidden?
Yes.
Okay, so I just you can go to Fabric Fill and you can ask for unbleached cotton.
Okay.
$10 a yard. So that would go on first. And then that would be nice and tight in my frame. And then I would attach my silk or my linen or my cotton, like my pretty stuff, on top of that. And then do a final tightening and then be ready to go.
So then literally there's nothing fancy about ground cloth. We're not using some specialized ground cloth. And if we're beginners and use Congress cloth because it gives us little channels, then that's a nice starter crutch. I'll be using that. So there's really nothing special, because that's obviously a question people have. Do I have to have some specialty cloth? No, you don't.
No. As your backing supportive fabric? No.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Obviously, you wouldn't use anything stretchy. You wouldn't use a beautiful silk. You just use basic calico.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, let's see. Now this is over my skis. Are calico and muslin the same thing?
Yep. Depends on which country you're coming from.
Okay. That's a language thing. All right. All right. And then somebody asked, Eileen, would you say that a cross stitcher could do this work? You do simple patterns?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say.
And so much gumption you have, right? Do you want to give it a go? Anybody can do it. Couching is very simple. It just depends on how intricate you want to make it. So if you'd like to give it a go, try something simple first. Anybody can do it.
Yeah, I was gonna answer that question for you, because I'm a firm believer that any of this stuff you can do. You just gotta just jump in and have at it and figure it out.
I tell my students, don't be discouraged if your first attempt doesn't look like mine. It's not supposed to look like mine on your first couple of tries. I've practiced a lot.
Yes, there's the difference right there. Yep. Let's see. We had one here. Does your holding thread technique change when the couch thread changes from metal to other types of threads?
Right. No. And what I wanted to show is for things you can couch, okay? You can couch metal. You can couch, rickrack. Once I couched a branch, I could take a bunch of these lavenders. I could couch those down. You can couch anything, and the same rule applies. You come up on one side, you go over, and you reinsert on the other side. Typically, your couching stitch is as wide as your couching thread. For decorative reasons, you could make it bigger or really tight, but typically it's the same width as your couching thread.
Yeah, you were demonstrating that, and you had a little illustration there for how you actually do the couching. Do you have that handy?
Yeah, I've got two. Which one do you mean?
The one on your right.
This one here.
Yeah.
I do. So this is just a little watercolor that I made up for people who like a visual. You take a little screenshot of that. There you go. It's for you.
Yeah.
So you can see how your needle is going to come down and then out again, slightly on an angle on both ways. Particularly if you have multiple rows of gold threads, you want to use that to help snug them up together.
Well, and I recall that from the from when we did the show last Sunday, that really is key. That very technique that you showed there, that kind of V, down and up underneath that underneath the metal thread is kind of key in terms of being able to keep things close together, keep things aligned. And if you get very far from that, then it gets a little tough to keep things together then.
Yeah, you want to try not to have to recover from big spacing issues.
Yeah, yeah. And then show that other one that you had there. The other.
Okay. So the reason I got this other one out is because some people wanted to know, how do I turn a corner when I'm doing some more way? How do I turn a corner nice and tight? The way I learned when I took a Russian embroidery class. So this is a little painting that I made up for my students. And I can demonstrate this on a hoop as well. I do have my hoop handy. So just looking through the back here. Hang on a second. Let me find my pointer. So, this is your row that you've just couched. Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, yeah, we're fine.
Okay. This is the row I've just couching. It's a double thread. Imagine this is, 2 silver threads right here, 1 and 2. And I get to my end of my row. Here's my line. You can see a line that I'll call it the turning line. So this would be drawn on my fabric usually. And then I'm going to go around and then carry on with my 2 strands this way. So what I do is I come up here at A. I'll call this A.
Yep. Yep, you're right on. Yep.
Okay. And then I come down at B. So I have a nice tight stitch right here. And sometimes at this point, I'll even do a little, what I call like a holding stitch. So just like a tiny little pinhead stitch right here, just to make sure that this one doesn't go anywhere.
Okay.
And then I come right where A was. I come exactly in the same hole. So that becomes stitch C. I come back up again at point A, which is now stitch C. And then I reinsert at D. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you're using 2 stitches, 1, and then the second one will be here, 2, to go around the curve there. And I always make sure that those stitches are along this turning line so that as I go up my row, I get many, many of these. They're all turning at the same point. Somebody asked, do I use a special tool to help me with that? Sometimes I'll just use, good old pair of tweezers. And I'll pinch the end just to make sure it's nice and tight. Or I'll also use a stiletto or a tickleberry, which is a Japanese embroidery tool. And after I've done A and B and C, and I'm about to do D, I will also poke my stiletto right here as I pull the threads and kind of tighten it around. That helps make it nice and tight. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So then that gives you that nice tight curve, because you were showing some examples of that in the video.
So I have this one here. I didn't have this last time, but I've got it handy. So you can see all along the top here, I've used the dark gray thread for turning the corners, and it's quite nice and neat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't need to use a dark gray there. I could have used like a self-colored light gray, and then you wouldn't see that kind of line all the way across the top and all the way across the bottom there. But I liked it. So you could use a contrasting thread to your metal, or you could use a self-colored. And I think it creates a nice edge when once you've got into the habit of it and you're able to get them so they're not going, ooh, like here's an example with red on gold. How's that angle?
That's good.
Yeah.
Here, let me close in on you. Stay right there.
Okay.
There we go.
So here's a red thread that I'm using to turn my corners. And it's just the same red thread that I used there, but I mean, I could use any color thread really. So I think that that's quite a nice way to turn your corners. It ends up being nice and tight for me.
Go back to your illustration here. Let me back off. I got your nose right in the screen here. You're okay. No, you're okay. I was zooming in, so when you put that down, your nose was right there.
It's a nice nose. It's okay.
It is just fine. It's just fine. So talk about when you come down at B. Then talk about that little pin stitch you put again.
Okay. Right. So sometimes you've done A and you've reinserted into B, and then you're going to come up here, but you just don't want A, B to move anywhere. So I'll do like a tiny little stitch just through my fabric where I know there's going to be something to hide it. So, it could be up here. I even drew a little X actually right there. So this is a stitch that's like the width of one or two of your threads of your fabric before carrying on to the next stitch. And I would do that again after I did D as well, just to make sure that nothing's going to go anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. So all right.
That's crucial. Those little pinhead stitches.
Well, that's why I wanted to go back to it, because I had a sense that was almost a difference maker in having success turning that corner.
Yeah, because I do pull on the thread quite a bit on my metal thread, so I don't want, when I'm pulling for my cotton thread that I just used for the couching and turning, to shift out of place.
Yeah, okay. And somebody asking if you have an example of, so they could see what the backside looks like when you do that?
Let me think. Looking at my desk here, what have I got here? Most of my work I finish. Oh, yes. Yes, I think I can get one. Yeah, I can actually. Give me a second. I have one little sample here that's easy to take out of my book.
Okay.
So
here now, I'm going to zoom in on you again, just so people can see. All right, there we go. Okay.
That's the front, and then I'm just going to turn it over. That's the back.
Okay. All right. So then the holding threads, well, obviously you get a pattern there because you're doing them consistently, but carrying and none of that matters. How far you carry it is getting the job done, because it's behind a solid fabric, so it's never going to show or matter.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not carrying it very far. We're talking here 5 millimeters.
Okay.
It looks big on the camera, but it's just 5 millimeters.
Yeah. Yeah, because the threads are so close together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you hold that up again just so I can see the turn?
Front. Okay, front or back?
The back. See the back of the
front?
That's, yeah.
Back.
Okay, and there's the turn. I see. All right. So that's just pretty straightforward then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just have to, think A, B, and then C is where A was, and over D after it's turned.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And then now Iman wants to see that third hand spool that you were showing in the video, and see that.
Right. Okay. And somebody mentioned a stitching peer of mine, Cynthia Jackson. She mentioned to me, that I use the Japanese version something to hold my threads on. But, the European would have been one called a broche, and it would show up Broche. And you can see this on the broder's coat of arms. And this would be a triangular base looking quite different from this one. So this is the Japanese version of something to hold your threads and act as an extra hand. So I wind my threads onto here. They're called koma. And I place them to the side and unravel my thread from underneath. So the koma actually have a direction to sit. So it unspools from the bottom. Okay. And you can even get some of these that are weighted that have, like a hole drilled here. And they've put something quite heavy in it to make them even heavier.
Okay.
But I said, the European equivalent that would have been used back in the day. Let's see, this is from Art of the Embroiderer by the Designer to the King, written in 1770. And I don't know if you can see it.
Here, I can zoom in here.
Okay, tell me if I'm holding the book
Go
too high.
down a little lower. There we go. Now you got it.
It would have looked like that. And I think you can get imitation versions of these. I actually think Jessica Grimm might have something like this. She can answer in the comments section if she has something similar to this.
Okay. Yeah, okay. And so in that instance, then having the thread come from underneath is the better technique in terms of not having things get away from you.
Yeah, because if it's like if you're using these and the thread is coming from underneath, then your thread is closer to your fabric.
Okay.
If it's the other way around, it's just that bit further away, and it's kind of like lifting off like this instead of staying lower, closer to your fabric. Okay. And you'll unspool it a bit ahead of you, so you have kind of something to hold on to. So you're not holding onto your metal threads and potentially tarnishing them, right? Mm-hmm. You're using it as your guide. Okay. Does that answer the question?
Yep, it did. And then also part of the question was, what is it called? And somebody already answered koma. Is that right?
Yep, Koma. You can buy them from the Japanese Embroidery Center. I know Berlin Embroidery has them, and probably some other Goldwork shops have them too. But I think the nicest ones come from the Japanese Embroidery Center in Atlanta.
That place. That place. Yep. Let's see. Folks, go ahead and ask questions here. We'll take all the questions.
Somebody had wanted me to demonstrate how I turn a corner.
Oh, yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Yes?
Go.
All right.
Bet.
So I just want to show you what I have going on my hoop here already. Get closer. So I've used two kinds of metals here.
Natalie, if you move it closer to you, it'll be in the center of the screen. I've zoomed in so people can see. There you go.
Like that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm just going to talk a little bit what's happening here. So this is like an imitation Japanese thread, quite a big one, really thick actually. But I did that because I thought it would be easier for you guys to see. So you can see I've couched along here, and I'm ready to turn a corner. You see I've drawn on my turning line here. So I couch. I'm going to do one stitch looking at me. And I've used a contrasting thread here because I wanted you to be able to easily see that. Okay, so now
and before you go on, so and that is a key element, because sometimes you would use a thread that would essentially disappear or be hard to see. So that line then becomes very critical in terms of knowing where you're at.
Yeah, I like to have a drawn-on turning line. Just helps me to line up my turns. Mm-hmm. So this is, according to the picture that I have below, this is A, and this is B, in relation to the picture I showed earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, A and B. No, I'm going to pull that through, nice and tight. And now C is going to be where A was. Let me just turn this to me for a minute. It's a bit hard to embroider from the back. I can't see. Okay, so I've come up. Now, this needle coming through, that's C. Okay, and I could have done a little pinhead stitch, right? Like right here, for example. I didn't, but I could have. Okay, now I'm ready to turn my thread around. So can you see now I've kind of wrapped my thread around the metal thread there?
Mm-hmm.
So I've done A, B, and C so far. Okay, now D is going to go and insert right on my turning line. Oops, my pink thread is wanting to get in on the show here. Okay. So now this thread it doesn't want to stay tight, right?
Yep.
So if I did a little pinhead stitch where I know I'm going to have further stitching to cover it up, for example, I did like a tiny stitch right here, it won't look tiny because I have an enormous blue thread here on the go. If I do that, oops, where am I on the back here? That'll help to pull that in place.
Okay.
And now I carry on stitching my brick stitch along here, 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 and here. Now you might wonder, why did I also make an example here and not just do this one? It's because this thread, it has no metal content. So it doesn't hold its shape as nicely when you turn around a corner. For example, passing has metal in it. And you know, this is just like a foil. You can see it's kind of unraveled here. It's a foil wrapped around some kind of synthetic core here. I don't know what that is made of. So it doesn't hold the shape very nicely. But watch if I, oh, I've got a slip knot on the back there, of course. Of course that happens when I'm demonstrating.
That's one of the rules.
This has to happen. Okay. I won't show you the back on this one. So this one, this is this, you know, this gorgeous sparkly. It's like a Grecian twist, but it's not a Grecian twist. It's 100% metal. This one. So I've done my couching with a pink thread. Can you see that here?
Let's see if we can see it. It's a little low. It's right at the bottom of the screen. You got any way you can lift it?
Yep, just a second. How's that?
There we go. Now we can see. Yep.
Okay. So, you know, I've couched along here. I've reached my turning line. So I've come out at A. Now I'm going to insert at B.
All right, and then now is when you would make that little pin stitch to hold that?
Yeah. So I know my thread's going over here later on, so I'll do my little pin stitch.
Oh, that's where you make it. Okay, now that makes sense.
Down here, because I'm not going to do embroidery down here, but I am going to do embroidery here, so it'll get covered up.
And now I can see how it would hold it. Okay, all right.
Also, to my great benefit, that this thread that I'm using has a real metal content. So when I come up at C and I turn it around, it's staying there.
Yes.
It's much easier than this thread. So now I'll go down at D, which is also on my turning line. And I'll make another little pinhead stitch close to where I'm working. And I'm ready. Now, you know, you could get out your tweezers if you wanted to. Now I'm ready to do my next couching stitch. Let's say it's going to be here. Again, I'm not on a great angle to see if I'm straight or not, but
right.
So you carry on.
And then you're on your way down the next row then.
Yeah, and then you would do the same thing at the other end. So you can see that this is quite nice. Oops, I went over 2 threads there. You can see that this is quite nice to not have to sink all your threads at the end.
Yes.
As long as you can get your metal threads wound onto something in a way that you can control them so they're not going all over the place. So here is, you know how you were asking me about reinserting on an angle?
Yes.
So this is the stitch where I would definitely go on an angle. So I've come up on the outside, and now I'm inserting in between the two threads, and I kind of inserted on almost a 45-degree angle there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I can see that pulls it right next to the previous one.
Yeah, and I'm coming up out of the 45, and I would insert again at a 45.
Yes, okay. Because I remember in a conversation with Allison Cole, she was talking. I didn't get it because I couldn't see it, but she was talking about that technique, and so I was most curious to see you demonstrate it in terms of how it makes it so that those two lie right next to each other and you don't get gaps.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as I also mentioned when I was talking about multiple rows of couching in ornuet, sometimes you have quite a heavy amount of couching happening. And then on either side of your design, you have less couching. So you have to make sure, and you might use a different weight of thread, which is tricky. You have to make sure that the space that you're leaving accounts for the heaviest weight of thread that you're using in your design.
Okay.
The easiest option is just to use the same weight of thread all the way across. But some people like to use like a translucent thread that, like these ones, which are, very, very thin, but you won't even see this
right
over top of your, as a couching stitch.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's one from Rachel. What do you mean by sinking your thread?
So, on this one here, I can't just snip this off at the end and leave it on the front of my fabric. It will unravel. It will eventually, do this.
Yeah.
So you have to use a large needle or a lasso, and you have to pull it to the back and then finish it off cleanly on the back. So, for example, when I finish this piece, this design by Mandy Ewing, I'm going to have to sink all these little threads into the back. That's going to take me forever, and it's like no embroiderer likes to do that. What would a better option is for me to wind this onto a pair of coma, and just zigzag back and forth. Like, imagine that I was sinking a thread at the end of each row. It also adds quite a bit of bulk when you're doing a lot of sinking and tying up. So it creates, I think, a cleaner finish when you can turn your corners tightly rather than having to do a lot of sinking, meaning bringing your threads to the back. Because
that edge of the fabric could get pretty heavy too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see here. Ruth asking, the 45-degree angle, is that angled toward the previous row? I think your painting shows that.
Yeah. So it's both ways.
Yeah. You're coming up and down underneath the thread.
Yeah. Sometimes it's easier to see on here. So, between my...
Hold it closer to you. There we go. Yeah.
Between, this row and that row, I'm going to reinsert on a 45 going underneath the previous stitched row.
Okay.
And that will help pull the top row down to the previous row.
Okay. So I'm not going under the row I'm stitching. I'm not going underneath that. I'm going underneath the previous row, the one that's already couched down.
Yeah, you're going to reinsert the needle under the previous row.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
One thing I didn't mention is that I like to use beeswax quite a bit.
Somebody asked if you coated the threads. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm using silk threads that I want to be very shiny, obviously I'm not going to use beeswax on it. It's going to dull them.
Right.
But sometimes I just leave threads on either end specifically for turning corners, and I will wax those because it's going to strengthen my thread quite a bit. So yes, I do use beeswax.
Yeah. But only beeswax.
Yeah, I don't use Thread Heaven. I don't use any of the synthetic stuff. Also, I get, the added benefit of smelling it every time I use it.
A plus in its own right, yes. What type of needle are you using?
Oh, well, it depends on the weight of your thread. So, and depends what you're doing. So
Okay.
sometimes I use a curved needle. Sometimes I use a large 18 chenille needle for sinking. For finer or ornue, I'm using a number 10 or a number 12 embroidery needle.
Okay, so sharp, not a tapestry.
No, never.
Yeah.
Not for this technique.
Right. Yes. Okay.
Somebody earlier, if there's not a question imminent, I can.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Somebody earlier emailed in a question and asked about, does your couching technique change if you use a different kind of metal thread? And I said, no, not really. But within the family of metal threads, your couching technique can change. So, for example, there's a type of metal thread called twist. Okay, can you see there's a twist? I can untwist it. So you can see if I untwist it, there are 3 threads there. And they're all twisted together nicely, beautiful. So some people, when they're couching this thread, instead of couching over the thread, as I've been talking about, as they're going along, they'll slightly untwist and they'll couch through one of the fibers, one of the 3 fibers to hold that up. So you don't actually see a couching stitch on top at all. It would be through one of the twists, and that makes it invisible. I have also seen other people couch on a diagonal when they're using a twist to try and hide their thread in the groove of the twist. So those are 2 other things that you can do with twist. And there's threads like Rococo and Check. That's this wavy thread. And a lot of people, they'll use where the valley is as the place to place their couching stitch, their holding stitch, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
And then there's also another Goldwork thread called Pearl. That's this stuff here. And you can see, I can open it a little bit. Actually, I'll open it a lot so you can see.
Yes.
You can see how it holds its shape. So before you stitch with this stuff, you open it a tiny bit, not like this, that's way too much. You would open it, just relax it a tiny bit. And then as you couch along with this, your thread would slip in between the grooves of this thread as well.
Okay, so then depending on your design, then you use that to advantage, because I only want to show gold, where if I wanted holding stitches to be part of the design, then I would make sure that they stayed on top.
Can you say that again?
So in this instance here, I only want to show gold, so I would use the thread, the nature of the thread, to be able to hide the holding threads.
Yes, you could, but also, you could just switch to a translucent thread, which makes it fairly invisible.
Okay.
So, yes.
Okay. Let's see. How close? Let's see. I think I missed one back here. If you're using white silk thread to couch, do you find that beeswax changes the color of the thread?
I have seen some white thread take on a bit of a yellow appearance. And I have also seen the white or light gray pick up a pencil if somebody's using pencil. So you have to be careful. It will. I've seen that happen more often than I have seen the beeswax change it.
Okay.
But I tend not to use beeswax when I'm using silk threads.
Okay. Oh, and do you have the pen that you use handy? Because I thought that was a real the archival pen.
Yeah, and you know what? I just ordered a box of 6, and I said I'm going to put that on my desk for this session so I can show everybody. And of course, it's not on my desk, but let me just get an older one here. There we go. There's a couple. So, they come in different colors. there you can see the label. It's, size 005, and they have a very fine tip. Let me take the.
Yes.
So I use this, so you can see here. Let me put these lids on. I use those pens to help me. Can you see the lines that I've drawn on here?
Yeah, I'm going to zoom in closer here. Yes, okay.
It helps me draw my lines on my fabric without smudging and being very fine. You can imagine if you use a thick marker, you won't be able to get, these lines are only 2 millimeters apart. So you need a nice fine tip marker if you're wanting to draw lines. And this is not counted fabric. So if I had counted fabric, an even weave, I could actually just count my fibers to help me know where to place my stitch.
Mm-hmm.
This is something I actually learned from Jessica Grimm a couple years ago. But in the Russian course I was taking, they weren't using counted fabric, and they wanted to say, well, what if you just have silk, beautiful silk that you want to do your embroidery on? How do you help yourself know where to put your stitch so you can get this nice geometric pattern couching happening? And so the way we were taught was to use these.
Yes. And the brand on those is?
So this is by Pigma Micron 005.
Pigma Micron 005. Okay.
Any art shop will have them. Amazon, of course. Amazon has everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now let me see. Jessica's been questions about tarnishing and oils, and Jessica's been handling those. David Osborne asking one. Do you stretch the base fabric to the stretcher bars and base stitch the ground cloth to that?
Yes.
Or do you stretch both base and ground cloth at the same time?
No. So yes to the first part of the question.
Okay, David, good call. Put that one first. Yay. So we stretch the base fabric to the stretcher bars, and then
yeah, and at that point you don't give it you wouldn't put it in your stretcher bar and get it as possibly tight as you could at that point. Leave a little bit of slack, then attach your silk, for example. Then you give it the final tightening.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And let's just address. Jessica's been handling the tarnishing, but for people who are not reading the comments, maybe talk a bit about that.
Okay. What's the question?
Whether they tarnish, and Jessica's been mentioning about humidity and those kinds of things.
Yeah. So it depends on the alloy of the metal that was used when they were made. But of course, they're metal. They have silver, particularly silver. Depends how much copper was in the mix when your metal threads were made. But they will tarnish. And I suggest to all of my students that if you're going to do metal thread embroidery, that you embrace this tarnishing, and that it's a sign of your work evolving and getting more beautiful over time. It's a continuing work of art. I wouldn't purposely put my Goldwork embroidery in the window for the light to shine on it all day. It's really going to tarnish quickly.
Yeah.
There are things you can do, like frame it under glass, but that does not mean that it's not going to tarnish. And I think that's just the nature of Goldwork embroidery to embrace that. And I actually did a series of experiments where I was purposely tarnishing threads to see what they would look like if I couched it. For example, let's say I had a silver thread and I couched it with bright white, what it looks like. And then I would tarnish that thread and see if I still like the way it looks with my white cotton thread that has not changed, but my silver thread has turned dark gray or even black. And what is the effect of that over time? And would this impact my choice of couching thread, holding thread, knowing that my couching thread will tarnish?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. Fun experiment. Do your embroidery and then stick it in a Tupperware container with a hard-boiled egg and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting. There's a congregation near us that built a new church here several years ago, and a massive copper steeple that they put on top.
Right.
And when they put that up, of course, it was bright, shiny copper in the sun. And it was just gorgeous. And of course, in the Chicago area, it didn't take long for it to put on its tarnish and put on the patina. and equally beautiful. But yeah, I can see why you'd say, all right, let me see what this is going to look like in 5 years. Am I still going to like it, or should I start out with a different combination and knowing I'm going to get to this other point? Yeah.
I called my experiment planning for patina, knowing that it's going to change. How does that impact your holding thread choice right now?
Yeah.
So as I said, I think tarnishing is something to look forward to and be excited about, and see how your piece is going to evolve over time.
Yeah. That's an interesting dynamic in this kind of needlework as opposed to just cotton and silk thread needlework. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody asking what stand you're using. That's just a standard Hardwick Manor.
Exactly. So I think online when you search, some people are calling this a fanny frame. This one you can see is the Hardwick Manor. It's a good brand, nice and deep. I think Jessica has these as well. I quite like this because I like to be able to put it under my leg, and let me move back a little bit here, and then have it either at this height or depending what angle I want my neck to be at, because I'm cognizant of that. A lot of times, particularly lately, I've been turning it around and bringing it up here and stitching it at this height. And this allows me to do two-handed stitching, which is good for your posture as well. So I like to use this quite a bit. This is nice for my smaller, more portable projects. But I never stitch having to hold my hoop, particularly in goldwork embroidery. You need both hands to kind of manipulate the gold thread, and then use the other one for turning your metal threads. And then, if you're just doing simple couching, you want to be able to kind of stitch like this, passing from one hand to the other. So obviously I can't do that if I'm holding my hoop.
Right. Well, and I think there you just demonstrated the versatility of that hoop, in that there are so many angles and heights that you can achieve, that you can be comfortable doing your stitching.
Lower it down. You can make it shorter. Some people, though, they don't like this part under their thigh. They say it bothers them, but I don't have an issue.
Yeah. Doesn't bother me. I got plenty of extra under there to pat it, so we're good. Let's see here. Anne, how would you turn a corner if the design goes from narrower to wider rows? And then earlier I'd skipped over it. Somebody asked about turning at angles when you're couching.
Okay. So my paper was focused on European, but I want to show you turning on angles on a Japanese piece.
Okay.
Just over here.
And Cindy and others who have asked about the paper, Jessica's paper, hoping that EGA will publish it. A couple of people have asked about how to get a hold of your paper.
Oh, my research paper?
Yes.
I'm hoping that it'll get published in Needle Arts Magazine by the EGA. But if there's somebody that just wants to read it for their pleasure right now, just send me an email, and I'll be happy to share it with you.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So I think what they mean, like turning on corners, are they talking about like turning and points like these silver points?
Well, one was asking about turning when it's not straight at angles. So that's shown there. Yes.
This is perfect. So this is a Japanese piece, but you can see here these are quite sharp angles. So you come up. Some people, what they'll do is they'll do one stitch here, and then they'll do another stitch right over where the point is to make it quite pointy. Okay. This is done in pairs of threads. So what I've done is on my outside thread, I have a couching stitch right at the point. On the inside thread, I have a couching thread over that as well. So I'm stitching one thread at a time, even though it's a pair. And then I've pinched them together over both of them before carrying on down. So this is a very nice example of that here.
Okay, let me zoom in and let's hold it a little closer to you. A little closer to you.
Here. A little closer to me, like here.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Now it's in the center of the screen. It's hard. It's the focus is hard because it's so close and so small. So
right.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a pair of threads. I'm coming up here. I'm couching. My holding thread is purple, and I've got to my tip here. I did one stitch over thread number 1 in the point, another stitch over thread number 2, also in the point, and then another stitch over here. And then I carried on around. So I've used 3 stitches to turn, which I have also used 3 stitches kind of in this one.
Yeah.
Well, actually, so 1, 2, and then a little pinhead. And sometimes I would use a pinhead when I'm working this piece as well. But this one has quite a lot of points and turns. So you can have up to 5 threads to help you turn, 5 stitches to help you turn a sharp point like that.
Okay, and then optically it seems like if you just have a little bit of your gold or silver showing beyond those threads, that visually it creates a point for you.
Yes.
Am I correct in that observation?
Yep. I mean, there over the point of this, there is a thread right in the very tip there, but it's so tiny. My holding thread is tiny. It's very thin that you can hardly see it. You only kind of notice it as you get a lot of them, building up in here. So there is a stitch right at the tip, and then another one going over them to kind of pinch them to accentuate that. Okay.
And then I think to the other question about stitching at angles that are not a complete 180-degree turn.
Okay.
That's really, is that just couching? Do you get your holding threads closer? How do you handle that?
Like if you wanted to make a V shape, for example, do you think that's what they're asking? Like,
yeah, I believe yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't use that Russian technique then. That's really to kind of bring them close together to make, a 90-degree turn. I would just do stitch A, B, and then C, D would be wherever I want it to open up to.
Okay. Okay. So
Hopefully
that's really just modifying your normal couching then.
Yeah. Or I mean, some people, they will just do a stitch only. Get back to this one. Some people, a lot of people, they'll just do a stitch. Here's A, and they'll make B here.
Oh.
And that's it.
Okay.
And then maybe they do a pin stitch and then carry on.
Okay.
So the problem is when you use a double thread like that, sometimes they bunch up one on top of the other. So this is to make sure that, this double row here does not buckle one on top of the other. Yeah. It's going to hold them flat.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. What kind of laying tool are you using?
Oh, well, my preferred laying tool is actually a Japanese one. This is called a Tekoberry. And it's square on the side.
Yep.
And comes to a super fine point down here. So these you can get from the Japanese Embroidery Center, the authentic ones. But anything, I like a metal one, like a metal stiletto. I think this is from Clover. This is quite nice as well. Because sometimes even the wood ones, they might have a little burr on it here and there, and then the metal ones are just that much smoother for me to use.
Yeah, I find it interesting. Now we call the other one that you had the best laying tool, but no, the other one. That right. I find it interesting. Was that just a little bit of tape on the end so it doesn't slip out?
Nope. This is because I meet with a Japanese embroidery group and I don't want them to steal mine.
Okay.
These things are a fortune. So we all have the exact same tools. So we do little tricks to identify whose is whose.
Okay. Mary wanted to know if that Japanese piece that you showed is a phase piece.
Yes, it is. It's called Karahana.
And that's what level is that? 4?
Yeah. Of
the 7, is it 7 levels?
10.
10. You're at 4? Well, you're probably beyond that now.
All over the place. I've got a phase 1 on the go. I've got a chords piece, which is equivalent to level 5 on the go. I have a practice piece on the go.
Okay. Okay.
Too many sticks and not enough frames.
Yep. Yep. Oh, Wendy, I would love to use some of the original antique metal threads. Do you know if anyone is selling? Yeah, she mentioned that at the beginning.
Yep.
Uh,
Tinsel Trading is your number one stop to go for those threads.
so Tinsel Trading for you, Wendy.
Yep.
They're in Berkeley, California.
Yep.
Kathy Grist, can you turn acute corners with plate?
Well, yes and no. I mean, so the plate is not meant to be used standing up. Maybe people don't know what plate is, though.
Yeah.
Plate is like a ribbon of metal. It comes in different widths. And so, imagine a ribbon. A ribbon, it would lay flat on your fabric. And imagine you come to the end of your row, and it's quite difficult you cannot do a 90-degree turn. It has to you have to do a couching stitch at the end of the row, fold it over on itself, and then, slightly angle it upwards and then carry on to the next row and then fold it over itself and carry on back and forth. So you create this kind of zigzag motion, and your couching stitch actually gets 100% hidden.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. How do you anchor the start of the couching thread?
Okay, right. So there's a couple of different ways. There's kind of two main ways, actually. Let me get this out here. I'm going to take it off here. So, this example here. Here I started it. She wants to know how you start it, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I've just started it with a stitch over the edge. I folded because I'm stitching with 2 threads. Okay, I folded it in half, and I placed a stitch on the end and into my fabric. That's one way you can start if you're using 2 threads. Another way is that you can just leave 2 long tails, and then when you're done all your stitching, you sink them into the back.
Okay. So either way. And so you just leave the tail laying there, and then you couch it down, and that holds it, and then you're off and running, and then...
Yeah, leave yourself, about 2 inches, so that you have enough to kind of fiddle with and put it through a lasso later on and sink it to the back. Or you can fold it over if you're using a double length like I showed you.
Yeah, well, that one design that you showed earlier that had all the pieces that you were going to have to sink, so that's a good example of how much to leave is...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, at the start of each of these rows, I've folded it in half, and I placed a couching stitch right in the corner there. And I got to my end of my row, and then I'm going to have to sink this thread later on at the end when I'm done the whole piece.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll see. No more questions on the board there. Do I have any questions? I think not. Holy smokes, we've used up an hour already. Wow. Other questions? Be quick. Which size micron do you use? 005. 005 for the micron pen. And it's archival. Note that it's archival.
Yep.
Smallest they make. Tim in with these. That's the smallest they make. It's archival ink too. Yep. Any other questions, folks, or we're going to call today? Thank you so much. This has been fun. Get those questions in quick. Nope. I think we got caught up. Show me. Show one of your. Go ahead.
I say everyone has to go and try it now, and then they'll come up with some more questions.
Yeah, that's when the real questions start. Yep. Yeah. Show one of your Japanese pieces. Oh, and I wanted to note you had your brooch there on your blouse.
I do. Yep. Don't have very many occasions to wear it, so today seemed like a perfect occasion.
Yep. Show off. Iman wants to know if you do online classes.
Not in the traditional sense of as online classes can be traditional. What I offer my students is when they purchase a kit of mine, I have a closed group on Facebook where they can post progress pictures and ask questions, and sometimes I have extra photos within that group. So it's just for people working on a particular design.
Okay. Okay. Now I have to see a Japanese piece. I love that Japanese stuff. Do you have something handy?
I mean, got this one. This is Karahana.
Oh, yes.
And then the other one that I'm currently working on is over there on my frame. So it's
Oh.
in progress. You might have, it's over here. So this is a Japanese embroidery frame kind of set up. I was working on that this morning because I'm having a Zoom meeting with my Japanese embroidery group.
That must be, is that, that Japanese embroidery intrigues me because it's so precise, so careful.
Yeah. And has Goldwork in it. That's what attracted me when I saw the package of Goldwork threads that you could get. I was like, whoa, I'm doing Japanese embroidery. So a stitching peer of mine, she did a presentation and she had this package with like 50 different metal threads all poking out of the end of these paper envelopes. I was like, I need this. This has to be in my life.
Had you from the start, right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you find that as you're making your way through the levels that is really testing you, or is it just a matter of patience?
It's a matter. I say Japanese embroidery is not for somebody who's in a rush. It's you have to have a lot of patience and be willing to work to a certain standard. So I think having a group of friends that you can meet with and share and get tips from, it's because Japanese embroidery, I feel like there's a lot of problem solving that you have to do. How do I figure out how to do this just the way it's meant to be done? So if you have a teacher, of course, and then some peers to do it with is quite helpful.
Okay.
Because a project takes a long time. It's not something you do in a few weeks. You're talking months. Yeah. Some people take them a couple of years.
Yeah, that's what I've sensed. Yes. Oh, now here we've had a couple more. All right, folks, we're going to wrap this up here, but let me see. The Melior or Melior, MELL. Yeah. Do you use that?
Yes, I use a Melior a lot, particularly when I'm using threads with a metal content and I want to shape the way my thread is going. Let's see if I can pull mine. Oh, yeah, I can. So just so in case people don't know what I'm talking about here. So this is my Melior. You can use this as a laying tool. You can use the rounded edge for shaping pearl or pushing a corner nice and tight. So yes, and this is a traditional kind of English embroidery tool, whereas this is the Japanese version.
Okay, all right. Okay, I think we're gonna call it. Natalie, thank you so much. It was fun.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks to Fire Poppies for sponsoring, and thanks to everybody for joining us. It was a fun hour. Appreciate it.
And just to remind anybody, if they want to read the paper, just send me a message through my website, and I'll send you a personal reply.
Okay. Very good. All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.